Welcome to today's show. We are honored to have with us for discussion via Zoom Daisy Amdany. Daisy is the chairman of the National Women's Steering Committee. She's also the executive director of Crown Trust. Today we'd like to discuss with Daisy some of the opportunities that are available despite the challenges we are going through at this time. As it is said, in every crisis there are opportunities. Welcome, Daisy, to today's program. How are you?
Thank you, Rose. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Now, Daisy, we'd like to start off by asking you, in your view, despite the challenges that are facing not just Kenya, but the entire world during this period of COVID-19, what opportunities might there be, not just for women, but for Kenyans in general?
First of all, let me tell you, I actually think that we have a lot of opportunity. Because what has come out very clearly is our over-dependency on production by others to supply our day-to-day needs. We have seen excitement around things like Kimotho, making the protective gear, and local manufacturers coming up with stuff. And I find that for me, it's actually sad because Kenya was once upon a time a manufacturing giant. And we can go back to that because we haven't lost the lands that used to plant cotton. We still have opportunity to be able to set up our ginneries and our textile industries. We all grew up with Kikomi, we grew up with Rivertex, Raymond's and all. So I think that we need to look at how do we come up with models of being able to produce what it is that we use. And this is a discussion that we must have very seriously, because if we move in that direction, we are going to automatically generate productivity among our people. We will be able to consume what we produce. So that is something that that's a conversation that we must have, and the government must be very deliberate about it. We cannot be celebrating things that we used to do before as though it's a new thing today. So I think for me, therein lies the opportunity. Also, given the fact that most countries are looking inward because we've had to close borders. There's been restrictions on air travel and everything. So a measure of self-sustainability has to be put in place. Food, for instance, I think it is unfortunate that our strategic food reserves were empty, and yet Kenya is an agrarian. We are supposedly an agrarian based economy. So going back to it, I think that the opportunity of being able to start looking at the agricultural sector as not just potential for generating productivity, but also employment for millions of people, because land is readily available, and whatever the case, people have to eat.
Yes, all right, yes, I agree. So you would say that this situation is actually bringing a new order of doing things.
Yes.
And particularly for women and in the area of food production, because we know manufacturing, as you say, and we know that's one of the 4 pillars of the president. What about food security? We know apart from the challenges brought on by COVID, we are also facing the locust invasion. We are facing floods. And we know the most affected are the rural-based communities. And these communities are very dependent on women. What's your view on that whole discussion?
Yes, in fact, I think that, and I hope that you're not going to take this personally when I say this, is that I think on that score, the media have failed us miserably, because it is true, there has been a very severe locust invasion. It is not just Kenya that is dealing with it. However, it has been devastating and it has been ongoing for several months. That in itself affects food security. As we speak, we have at least 20 counties from the statement made by the chair of the Council of Governors yesterday. the governor of Kakamega, Wycliffe Oparanya, 20 counties in Kenya are submerged. Okay? So all these, you are talking about displacement of people, you are talking about food insecurity, and we don't see governments really coming out strongly to address this. Remember that agriculture is a devolved function. Yet the county governments right now are still waiting on the government, the national government, the treasury, to release the 5 billion that was committed by the president at the beginning of this, the strict measures, the stringent measures. And that money was supposed to go towards the health interventions. So I think that among the things that Kenyans also need to do is to find their voice. Government is not there. The people in government, the people in leadership are not there to entertain us with empty rhetoric. They are actually there, and they are paid very, very well so that they can come up with solutions to the challenges that Kenyans are facing. Kenyans are taxed very heavily, including Mama Mboga. And you can see that even in the measures that the president has taken, they still were taking that 1%, the what they are calling the patriotic tax, that the 3% was reduced to 1% so that everybody is paying tax. And the reason we pay tax is because we expect our government to address our challenges, put in place the necessary infrastructure to allow us to be able to flourish and to thrive in whatever it is that we're doing. And the government needs to get serious about this. But also Kenyans need to find their voice.
So in your view, media hasn't given enough attention to the broader issues that are facing us, like drought or floods. But do you think this is also a reflection of the Kenyan population, the people who consume the media? What they want to hear about more is about politics. Do you think there's too much emphasis on politics and political outcomes? As we know, for the last 3 years, the whole country has been discussing 2022 and politics day in, day out. Is this a reflection of society? Because media does reflect the society in which it operates. What is your view on this?
Let me say this. First of all, I think it's a reflection of who owns the media. Okay? Because the media is owned by the people who are also feeding us a lot of this politics. And they own the media and they want to see themselves in the media. Okay? So that is problem number one. So that in essence, we don't have very independent media, even in terms of being able to fact check. The way our environment, the political environment is structured, the possibilities of having yourself shut down because you have aired content that has displeased somebody somewhere is real. I mean, even despite the guarantees that we have, within the Constitution on freedom of the press and freedom of expression, we know that it is not so. You people know, you know full well that media houses were shut down for a time because the president was unhappy about some content that was aired. And we had basically one media house running. And so you were only allowed to air what he felt was appropriate. And I think that is part of the problem because media rely a lot on revenue. And especially at a time like this, especially when there's an economic downturn, revenue streams are very low. Advertising revenue streams are very low. Government is a consistent source of business. And so you don't want to ruffle feathers where you are hoping to get work. I think that that's part of the problem. I think the environment that we're in, so that it becomes very difficult for media, because I will tell you that it is not so much Kenyans. Go to social media. When you go to social media, and that's a space that government can't control, and they're very unhappy that they can't control it. Go to social media. On social media, you actually get to see the sentiments of Kenyans. And a lot of it is great displeasure. with the government and the way they are doing things, and even not addressing pertinent issues. So if you ask me, I think that mainstream media have been constricted because of the kind of environment that we operate in.
Yes. Now, do you also agree that in today's world, mainstream media, as we knew it, is really becoming a thing of the past, because media has shifted to the digital platform, to the internet, to social media. And the days where one could claim government restricting or shutting down or threatening media are long gone, really, because all media is now digital. You can't shut down the internet. Okay, we have seen some leaders attempt to do that, but you're not going to shut down the internet, you're not going to shut down media, and everybody is a reporter. We're in a period where we have citizen journalism. Yet when you look at social media, when you look at the media on the internet, the discussion in Kenya is about politics. So we're not seeing anybody discussing, the major discussion is about politics. The major obsession is politics. It's not the other critical issues like manufacturing, like drought, like locusts. So as I said, do you think there is some obsession, even when you look at the WhatsApp groups, a lot of the discussion that goes on is about politics, 2022, Senate positions, parliamentary committees, all the changes going on in the parties. Do you, in your view, think that perhaps it's time we shifted this mass obsession with politics and moved it to issues that are more productive for the country? What is your view on this?
You know, there's so many people who don't watch, and I'm among them, who don't bother watching TV anymore because it's just tiring. You know, it's the same old, you know. However, let me say this. If you go to social media, you will see see stuff about locusts, you'll see stuff about droughts, you'll see a lot of things that are not being captured in mainstream media. However, we'll always need mainstream media, because one of the other challenges that we have with social media and this new media is a lot of fake stories and planted stories. And unfortunately, our politicians are also very adept at it. Remember, they even hire bloggers to blog and push fake news stories, you know, and also seek to try and influence the discourse on social media to keep up with their politics. We've seen that, you know, where you have these Twitter bombs and, you know, social media blasting and all that, just so that you can get the trend and make people focus more on your thing. So I think it's dicey in the sense that, you know, yes, people are moving away from mainstream media, but there is a value in mainstream media because we still trust mainstream media to give us the real story. If you do the polls, if you've looked at the polls, media still comes out as one of the more credible sources of information, and not just media, but mainstream media. So that I know that there. So I think it's fluid, but when you talk about obsession with politics, it's because the politicians encompass our entire lives. Okay, they do. You will find they own the media, they own the companies, they own basically everything that, you know, that is around us. And so you'll find that there's a lot of angst from the general citizenry because of those frustrations.
Do you think they own the people's minds, the ability for the people to think independently or clearly?
No, they don't. Actually, surprisingly, they don't. And the other thing is, you know, a lot of this new media operates with only 25% of the population. Because when you look at smartphone penetration, we do have a lot of mobile penetration, but smartphone penetration is only about 25%. So even like us guys, that's why we have our grassroots meetings. And our grassroots meetings, it's guys with the mulikamwizis. Those guys are not on Twitter, they are not on Facebook, they are not, some of them don't even watch TV. But among them, radio is king. And so you have a lot of community radios. a lot of community radios, and some of the community radios are really doing a lot of good work. They're giving farmers information on inputs and whatever. So there's, we really do have many different spheres of action within the media space. But I will tell you that because we actually do physical meetings on the ground with the very many of our stakeholders, you will find that there the problems are real and the problems are with them. And there you are not going to PR away their problems, because they are the ones who have been displaced. They are the ones whose houses have been flooded and the government is nowhere to be seen. They are the ones whose crops have been eaten by the locusts, all, and they have nothing to eat. They are the ones living the disaster of government not intervening. They are the ones who are planting and have no markets. And they have been hit very hard by this COVID thing. When we've shut down markets, measures have interfered with supply chains, So these people are very hard hit, and they're sitting. And what are they seeing? They hear our leaders talking about politics of succession, but they have, their problems are with them.
Yes, now let's move on and talk about, perhaps just to follow up on what you're saying, about what we call the national character. Because as one of the leaders in the world said, you can't build a democratic society without discipline. And the key components of a national character include responsibility. How far do you think our own people take responsibility for their own well-being? For example, when you're alerted well in advance that there's going to be, the weatherman says there's going to be rainfall. Because rainfall didn't just start today, it's been there for generations. Long before the colonialists came to this country, certain areas flooded. And as we know, on the Zambezi River, people moved to high ground because they were expecting floods. And when the floods went, they moved to the lower ground. And it was the responsibility of the local leaders and themselves to do that, to safeguard themselves. Also, when we listen to the Minister for Health, Honorable Mutahi Kagwe, when he asks people to self-quarantine or to observe certain restrictions, we've seen countries, perhaps in other nations like in the Far East or in Europe, where they self-quarantine. They're not forced into self-quarantine. But in Kenya, it was a battle. People are being caught in bars, in people's houses, having parties. Even in quarantine centers, they were not observing social distances. So let's just give me your views on what you assess as national character, where do you think people take enough responsibility upon themselves, or is everything Serikali's idea?
I wish I had the clip of a lady saying that she didn't believe that there was COVID. Because she said, if really there was COVID and it was as deadly as it was, then the government would be on the ground warning them and helping them get masks. Much of what you're talking about, and in those other countries, much of that world is a middle class society. And not the kind of middle class that we have here, because middle class, the middle class of Kenya has been very badly hit by the COVID pandemic, the COVID measures. One of the things that activist Boniface Mwangi has always said is that the middle class in Kenya is a paycheck away from poverty. And we are beginning to see that. However, many of these measures that the government has put in place are literally cut and paste measures, mirroring what other Western countries have done, okay? But look at what they have done additionally, because you talk about discipline, but look at what those other governments have done when they have put the restrictive measures. They have given cash disbursements, support to people who've lost jobs. They have opened up unemployment centers where people who have lost their jobs or means of income can actually go, and the government will give you a check to be able to meet your day-to-day needs. No such thing is happening in Kenya. In Kenya, we have cash transfers, but those cash transfers are part of the safety net program that targets the OVCs, the orphans, and vulnerable children and the vulnerable communities, okay, and the elderly, okay. But now here the restriction measures have created a new set of vulnerable people. So these people are not vulnerable because they cannot work. They cannot work and they cannot meet their day-to-day needs because of the measures. So they are not able to go out and work. So they have to sit in a confined environment. How many people, and this is the thing, many of them have been asking, so I stay home and I die. I stay home and I watch my family. So people have been trying to go out, not because they want to get infected, but because it's difficult for you to be in a situation where you are strong, you are able to work, you're able to pull this and that together, but you can't do it and nobody is coming to your aid. So that is problem number one. The other thing is, you talk about social distancing. Have you seen how people live? Maybe in the rural areas where there is space, it is possible to do that, open spaces. But remember that there's a lot of rural urban migration because many people come to the city to look for work, to cities. So Nairobi, Mombasa, Kisumu, and they do it because they are looking for work. Many of them live in the slums. Slums, there is no opportunity for social distancing. There is no, so what you are calling indiscipline, what you are calling a lack of responsibility in keeping myself safe, you're talking about people who live in conditions where they don't have running water. You are assuming that the people live where they have water. You've seen right now that the water companies are complaining that their costs are skyrocketing because the state said they must ensure that people who don't have water have water. So they've been taking water to the slums, okay? So when you talk about things like sanitation and all the things that are meant to keep this thing at bay, ordinarily, these people just don't have this. The infrastructure is not there.
Maybe just to move forward is okay. We have seen on social media, on main media, what you're calling mainstream media. We see people when they are caught up in bars, locked up, or they are in changardens in the slums, unable to keep social distancing. Perhaps there is an element of social responsibility when somebody chooses to go to a changarden, and there are hundreds of them, where it's not the fact that they are poor, that it's perhaps lack of discipline. But anyway, as chairman of the National Women's Steering Committee, what solutions would you offer? What policy changes or what solutions do you think to address these major problems? You may not call them, personal responsibility, but what measures would you propose that are put in place that we can see society perhaps lifting up or changing the way they perceive or their behavior?
I will agree with you on the score of definitely there are those irresponsible people, and they're not just in changardens. They are also we have seen people doing some very unacceptable things, and in society you will always have those people. We've seen the police behaving also very badly, and so yes, there is that measure of the people who just do silly things. You heard the president himself talking about his own son deciding to go out despite the restrictions, and he gave him a dressing down because he was like, you wanted to go and party. So what if your actions now endanger everybody, So it's not poor people, it's people. We will have irresponsible people and all. As the National Women's Steering Committee, we actually have, as Crown Trust, we've commissioned research. Because one of the things that we have to be clear about, even as we make proposals to government on what can be done to increase productivity, it must be sound and reasonable, doable within the policy space that Kenya operates in, and also politically practical. We are looking at it right now. We hope to be able to launch the research in the findings, our paper in August, when we plan to have meeting on women and the economy. So allow me not to preempt the findings, because among the things that we're looking at is to be able to generate productivity from the lowest, the as low down as we can go, because we believe to be able to make the great leap that the government is seeking in terms of generating productivity among people, those who are really very low income earners, bringing them to a different level of income will have great impact. And those are the kind of policy decisions, policy recommendations that we want to make. However, I'll go back and say that one of the key areas that we absolutely must look at is agriculture. And there are some good things that the government had talked about being able to do. I think the government needs to go back to that. Even issues like flooding, we shouldn't have to have people moving to higher ground if the government was to put in the dams, you know. We can train people on rain harvesting, because despite all the flooding that we see in certain areas, Kenya is actually ranked as a water scarce country, you know. So rain harvesting and moving away from rain-fed agriculture, you know, to more deliberate means. And so the plan that the government had of building dams, really, they should take this seriously, because there is plenty of water that is going to waste, you know. Giving farmers seeds and financing. When we look at financing for agriculture in Kenya, it's actually not that high. You'll be surprised. Maybe like 3% is what goes to financing agriculture. And private sector should also come in. Banks. Many banks are not going to give you money, by the way, to go into agriculture, simply because of how vulnerable it is and climate insecure, you know, because of the climate vulnerabilities. So we need to start looking more deliberately at agriculture and putting in place policy measures that will allow a huge number of small-scale farmers, which is where very many women are. Small-scale farmers, because by the way, small-scale farmers supply 70% of Kenya's food needs.
Yes, and we do know that agriculture is the biggest sector of the economy. So it's critical what you're saying about investing more. It employs the largest number of people and is the biggest part of the Kenya's economy. But before, just to move on slightly, is to ask you your views as chairman again of the National Women's Steering Committee, your comments on the challenges that have faced women, in particular during this period of COVID. We know that women get impacted more, whether in agriculture, in households, but we have seen stories of the impact, negative impact it has had, not just on the family, but particularly on women. What are your views on this?
It's been very devastating. The household pressures, I think families are very stressed because we've seen unacceptably high numbers of gender-based violence. And by the way, it's not just women. Of course, the women are more affected, but we've also seen men, taking the brunt, and children. A lot of sexual violence and defilement against children. And the biggest problem is that we don't have rescue mechanisms. There are no mechanisms. Our social services that were in existence before have all but collapsed, so that people who are in situations where you are in a violent situation, you can't come out of it. There's nowhere where you can go and you're safe. So people end up staying in those, environments, and we have seen people dying, people getting killed. So that is also something that I think the government needs to look at. Mainly it falls under the mental health arm where we look at the trauma, because trauma visits people in very many ways, and even the trauma of unemployment, sudden loss of income. Here you are, children are not in school, you've got mouths to feed, you've lost your job and everything, and the only thing that is around you is needs and wants, and you just don't know how to cope. We have very poor coping mechanisms in our country.
Sorry to interrupt you, but what specific measures would your organization propose that are put in place to address these really specific issues that impact women?
We focus on two main areas: political and economic emancipation of women. However, because the network also has organizations, we at the organizational level do not deal directly in matters. We do have other organizations that deal with it. So there are measures that have been put in place, and we've been working closely with organizations to get rescue to people. So we've worked with people like Humanity in Kenya, where we've been organizing. What we've done on our level is we did a needs assessment. We developed a matrix to be able to take a needs assessment from the network, and it was overwhelming. You're talking about from food to basic things like sanitary towels, basic things like soap, and people really not having the wherewithal to meet those needs. We've had hardware solutions that have been given to others, where water tanks and water has been taken to them. On the GBV front, there's been interventions in terms of trying to mitigate the exacerbating factors, so getting food donations. So Humanity in Kenya have been working with people like Team Pankaj, who are actually taking food to the homes, okay? But on the issue of GBV, let me tell you, that has been problematic because there are no shelters, government shelters are not there. So that one of how to get people out of difficult situations has been a very hard nut to crack. And what has been happening is people have just been left to, they're like just trying to mitigate the exacerbating factors. So that in itself is problematic. Of course, there's medical interventions. Organizations like CREW are also seeking legal assistance, but also the courts are not working. So it's actually been a very difficult time. And I think that even coming out of it, among the discussions we've had, and we had this discussion yesterday, is we actually need to have shelters in place. And so we are proposing, can we do joint interventions with government, whereby we revive some of these centers that used to be in operation under the social services, and work jointly, civil society with government, to be able to man these centers, to be able to have working helplines, so that if you're in a situation where you need rescue, you can call this number and somebody can come and rescue you. So it's been a very dicey situation.
That's a very good initiative, and we hope it's followed through and something comes out of it. The need for shelters is critical to protect women and families. But finally, before I let you go, Daisy, I'd like to hear your comments, your views on leadership, and in particular, women's leadership for this country, and how far you think women have come in playing a role in leadership.
Why would you ask me that? And I think across the board, both men and women, I think our leadership has been very disappointing because really they've really not been addressing many of the challenges that are facing our country. But having said that, the opportunity is there, and people need to start taking leadership seriously in this country, which is why in our platform we seek to build a core set of values about what leadership embodies, what leadership is about. Because for many people, leadership is an opportunity to get onto the gravy train, and all. But it has not all been terrible. I would not give them zero. I will not give them 100%. I cannot give them on a scale of 1 to 10. I would say our women, given also that it's a relatively new space for them, it's really shy of 10, not even 10 years, 7 years, really, since we had the highest number of women in leadership, ushered in by the provisions of the Constitution. So in 7 years, what are we seeing? We're seeing women, yes, coming into their own. To their credit, there are some pieces of legislation that had been, doing the rounds in Parliament and never saw the light of day. Things like the Domestic Violence Act, it's now an act of Parliament, the Domestic Violence Act, marital property, protection of the children. They've really done a lot. I know that several senators, Elachi, when she was senator, brought the food security bill. So we have seen women addressing some very pertinent issues, particularly with regard to safety and security and socio-economic issues. We've seen them doing, with the women reps, setting up, these table banking, the merry-go-rounds, trying to get women economically empowered. However, I do think that on the legislative front, there are many disappointments because the law helps us set pace in a nation, and there are many legislations that have fallen through. But I will say this for them. We have seen that if your principals are not interested in following through on certain things, because you see, like now the 2/3 gender principle, which we have been following since 2011, it has never gone through Parliament. But we know it's not even because that women don't want it or they haven't tried. It's because there's a lack of political will at the highest level. Principals know how to mobilize when they need people to pass legislation. We have seen them mobilizing, they whip their members. Instead, we have seen when it comes to issues of women, they are de-whipped. So I think as women, and we need to build a sisterhood of women, whereby it just doesn't fall on women leaders to be able to change the dynamics of how our politics is structured. Unfortunately, for many of the women, they have to play tune to their political masters because political parties still remain, personality cults. They are led by one man who is the one who runs the show. And if you're not towing that line, you're liable to a political execution. So we need to fight for our structures, institutions, ORPP, the Office of the Registrar of Political Parties, to be strengthened so that they can then strengthen political parties, make them ideological institutions that can push an agenda. That way women can come in and push an agenda without fear of offending the powers that be that own the party at the risk of losing your political career. So that straddling that divide, I think for women has been very difficult. And so what we have been seeing is more about women towing the political agenda of their political masters. Yet in Kenya, the political masters ought to be the citizens and the voters. So it's up to us to begin to shape that playground and make it work for us, But for as long as we are tribal, as long as it's mutuetu, we are not going to get very far.
Thank you, Daisy. Well, that's it for today's show. Thank you and enjoy the rest of your viewing.